He helped a lost boy find his way, then saw the tattoo on his arm. He almost didn't stop. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. It was getting late. The road ahead was dark and empty, the kind of stretch where you could drive for miles without seeing another car. He had taken this route 100 times before. Nothing ever happened on this road. It was just a way to get home. But tonight was different. He saw someone walking along the shoulder. A figure, small, with his head down and hands stuffed into the pockets of a thin hoodie. It was cold. Too cold for anyone to be out there alone. At first he drove past, slowed a little, looked in the rearview mirror, then kept going. It wasn't his business. He told himself that. He told himself the kid was probably fine. Maybe just walking to the next gas station. Maybe not his problem. A few seconds later, he hit the brakes. He sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, engine idling. Then he turned around. When he pulled up beside the boy, he rolled down the passenger window halfway and leaned over. "You all right?" The boy didn't answer at first. He kept walking. Then he stopped. He looked over, cautious, but not surprised. "Where you headed?" the man asked. The boy shrugged. "Just that way." "Long walk in this weather." Another shrug. "You need a ride?" The boy looked at the truck, then back down the road. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just stood there for a long second, like he was waiting for something to feel safe. Then he walked to the passenger side and got in. He didn't talk much. Said his name was Caleb. Said he was trying to get to another town, but didn't say why. His voice was low, rough around the edges, like he hadn't used it much lately. He was maybe 16. Hard to tell. Skinny, worn down. The kind of tired that doesn't come from walking. It comes from everything else. The man didn't ask too many questions. He just nodded and kept driving. They passed a few road signs, a diner, a gas station closed for the night, a string of lights off in the distance, probably the edge of the next town. "You hungry?" the man asked. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "All right," the man said. "We'll stop somewhere." They didn't say much after that. Just the hum of the truck and the sound of tires on pavement. The man kept his eyes on the road. The boy kept his eyes on the window. Something about him didn't sit right. Not in a bad way. Just off. Like he was carrying more than he could hold. The man had seen it before. Different faces. Different stories. But the same look. They reached the edge of town just before midnight. The lights from a small diner flickered ahead, still open. He pulled into the lot, parked the truck, and looked over. "You coming in?" Caleb nodded again. Quiet. Almost like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. They stepped inside and found a booth near the back. The waitress brought 2 menus, asked if they wanted coffee. Caleb said nothing. The man ordered for both of them. When the food came, Caleb ate like he hadn't had a full meal in days. The man watched, but not in a judging way, just trying to understand. He didn't know the whole story yet, but something told him this night was more than just a ride. He just didn't know how much everything would change. Not yet. Not until later. Not until the moment he saw the tattoo on the boy's arm. They didn't speak much after the food came. Caleb kept his head down as he ate, focused on the plate in front of him like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. Every bite looked like it had been earned. Like it wasn't just about hunger. It was about survival. The man across from him didn't interrupt. He stirred his coffee and gave him space. He'd seen kids like this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the signs. The quiet, the guarded posture, the way they never looked anyone straight in the eye for more than a second. After a few minutes, the man spoke. "Where are you coming from?" Caleb paused, then shrugged. "Nowhere." "Long way to walk from nowhere." Caleb didn't respond. The man didn't push. He just nodded. "All right." They sat there in the low hum of the diner, the sounds of dishes clinking and soft music playing from an old radio by the counter. It was late enough that the place had mostly emptied. Just a trucker 2 booths over and a waitress wiping down the tables. Caleb finally leaned back in the booth, full for the first time in what looked like days. His arms were crossed. His eyes moved to the window. "You got somewhere you need to be?" the man asked. "No," Caleb said. Then, after a beat, "I was trying to get to Mason. Got people there, I think." "You think?" Caleb shrugged again. "My mom had a cousin out there. She used to talk about him sometimes." The man nodded. "Ever met him?" "No." It was quiet for a few seconds. "All right," the man said again. "Well, it's too late to be out on the road. We'll figure it out in the morning." Caleb glanced at him. "You don't have to do this." "I know," the man replied, "but I'm doing it anyway." They left the diner just after midnight. The parking lot was empty, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the background. The air had gotten colder. Caleb wrapped his arms tighter around himself as they walked to the truck. They drove down the main stretch of town until they found a small motel. Nothing fancy, just a single-story building with a flickering light over the office door and a row of rooms facing the lot. The man went inside and came out with a key. "1 room, 2 beds," he said. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to explain anything. Just rest." Caleb nodded without saying a word. Inside the room, the man placed the key on the table and kicked off his boots. He pulled off his jacket and folded it over the chair. Caleb stood awkwardly for a moment before sitting on the edge of the second bed. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. Just real. The man didn't ask any more questions. He didn't tell Caleb what to do or where to sleep. He just turned on the lamp near the nightstand, then lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Caleb sat still for a long time before finally kicking off his shoes and lying down on top of the covers. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't say goodnight. The man reached over and turned off the light, leaving the soft glow of the streetlight outside to filter in through the curtains. Neither of them slept right away, but they didn't need to talk about that either. The room stayed quiet. The air between them felt steady, like maybe, for just one night, things didn't have to be so heavy. They didn't know each other. Not really. But something had settled between them. Something that felt like understanding. Morning would come soon enough. And with it, a truth neither of them was ready for. The morning was quiet. The sun came through the thin motel curtains in long lines across the floor. One of them had left the window cracked open during the night, and the air inside the room had turned cold. Not freezing, but enough to make you pull the blanket up without thinking. The man was already awake. He hadn't slept much. He never did in places like that. Not that he minded. He'd spent plenty of nights in motels over the years, some better than others, most forgettable. This one wouldn't be. He looked over at the second bed. Caleb was still asleep, curled up on top of the covers, one arm draped across his chest, the other hanging slightly off the edge. He looked younger in the daylight, less guarded, like whatever weight he'd been carrying had loosened a little, even if only for a few hours. The man got up quietly and made coffee in the small machine by the sink. It tasted like burnt plastic, but it was warm. He sat in the chair near the window and watched cars go by. Not many, just enough to remind him the world was still moving. About 20 minutes later, Caleb stirred. He sat up slowly, blinking hard, then looked around like he wasn't sure where he was for a second. "You're good?" the man said. "Still the motel?" Caleb nodded once. What time is it? Just past 8. Caleb rubbed his eyes and stood up. You been up long? Little while. There was a pause. Thanks, Caleb said, voice low, for not kicking me out. You hungry? Caleb nodded. They checked out of the room and got back in the truck. A diner sat just a few blocks away, tucked between a feed store and a hardware shop. Same kind of place as the one the night before. Counter seating, booths with cracked vinyl, and a chalkboard menu near the entrance. They sat near the back again. This time Caleb ordered his own food. The waitress brought them plates, eggs, toast, hash browns, and filled their coffee cups without asking. Caleb ate slower than he had the night before. He looked a little more settled now, like maybe he didn't have to hold his breath every second. After a while, the man leaned forward. You ever been to Mason before? Caleb shook his head. No, just heard about it. That's where I was going. You think your cousin's still there? I don't know. My mom used to get letters from him. That stopped a while ago. You got a last name? Harvey. His name was Daniel Harvey. The man thought for a second. That's not much to go on. I know. They sat in silence for a minute. Caleb sipped his orange juice and looked out the window. Can I ask you something? The man said. Caleb glanced over. Yeah. You run away? Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared down at the table, then gave a slow nod. Yeah. From what? Caleb took a breath. Let it out. People. Situation. I don't know. Everything, I guess. The man nodded. All right. He didn't press. He didn't ask what kind of people. He didn't need to. Not yet. After they finished eating, they headed back out to the truck. The morning sun was higher now, warming the windshield and cutting through the chill. Caleb climbed in without a word. The man looked over before turning the key. You still want to go to Mason? Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. All right, the man said. We'll head that way. They pulled out onto the highway, the road stretching open in front of them. Caleb leaned back in the seat, arms crossed, eyes half closed. He looked tired, but calmer, less on edge. The man kept his hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. He didn't know the whole story yet, not even close. But something about this kid, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke like he didn't expect anyone to care, kept the man from walking away. He didn't know what was coming, not until later, not until the moment he saw what was inked into the boy's skin. They pulled into town just after noon. It wasn't a big place. One main street with a few storefronts, a gas station, a small grocery store, and a couple of brick buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in 30 years. The kind of town where people notice when a new face shows up, and word travels fast. The man pulled into a gas station on the edge of town. He filled the tank while Caleb went inside to use the bathroom. The kid still hadn't said much since breakfast, but there was something different about him now. He looked more alert, still guarded, but not as hollow. When they got back in the truck, the man looked over. There's a little motel down the road. Decent place. Not too expensive. Caleb nodded. Okay. You want me to stay, or drop you there? Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, thinking. Then he spoke without turning his head. Stay. Just for a little while. All right. The motel was just a few blocks away. Simple building. Faded sign. A row of doors, each with the number slightly crooked above it. The man went in, paid cash for the night, and came back out with a key. Room 6. Inside, it was clean enough. 2 beds, a small table, a TV that probably only had 5 channels. Caleb dropped his backpack by the door and sat down on the edge of the bed farthest from the window. He didn't take off his jacket. The man sat at the table and pulled out his phone. No messages, no calls. That was fine. He wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. "You sure this cousin's out here somewhere?" he asked. Caleb shrugged. "No, just hoping." The man nodded slowly. "Sometimes hope's enough. Sometimes it's not." Caleb didn't respond. The afternoon passed slowly. They didn't talk much. Caleb dozed off for a while. The man flipped through the TV channels but didn't settle on anything. He was thinking too much. Not about himself, but about the boy. Where he came from. What he was running from. Why he was here. As the light outside started to shift, Caleb sat up and stretched. The sleeve of his jacket slid down as he reached for his shoe. That's when the man saw it. A tattoo, just above the inside of Caleb's wrist. Small, faded, but clear enough. The man's stomach dropped. He didn't say anything. Not right away. He'd seen that mark before. Years ago. His brother had one just like it. Same shape, same angle. It wasn't the kind of thing you forgot. A gang symbol, one of the older ones. Not flashy, not big, but it meant something. Something real. Something dangerous. The man looked away before Caleb noticed. He sat still in the chair, hands folded. His brother had died carrying that mark. Not because he wanted to, but because he'd gotten pulled into something he couldn't get out of. The man had spent years trying not to think about that time. Now here it was again, right in front of him. Caleb stood and walked to the small sink to splash water on his face. The tattoo disappeared again under his sleeve, like it had never been there. But the man couldn't unsee it. He wasn't afraid of the boy. That wasn't it. Caleb wasn't threatening. He wasn't loud or aggressive. But the symbol told a different story, one the boy hadn't shared. The man sat quietly, thinking about what to do. He didn't want to scare the kid off, didn't want to make him feel cornered. But at some point, he was going to have to ask. Not out of judgment, out of truth. He looked at the boy drying his face with a towel, watched the way his shoulders tensed like he expected something to go wrong. And the man knew. Whatever the story was, Caleb wasn't just lost. He was hiding. The question stayed with him the rest of the night. The motel room was quiet. Caleb had gone back to lying on the bed, one arm tucked behind his head, the other across his chest. The light from the TV flickered faintly, playing some old black-and-white movie neither of them were really watching. But the man wasn't focused on the screen. He kept thinking about the tattoo, about what it meant, about the weight it carried. He hadn't said anything yet, and he didn't plan to. Not until the time was right. He knew what it meant to come at someone too fast with a question like that. Especially a kid like Caleb, worn down, on edge, halfway ready to bolt. If you pressed too hard, you lost them. He'd seen it happen. So he waited. The next morning came early. The sun was barely up when the man sat at the edge of the bed, pulling on his boots. He glanced over and saw Caleb already awake, sitting against the headboard, staring at nothing. "You sleep at all?" the man asked. "A little." The man nodded. "Breakfast?" Caleb shrugged. "Sure." They went to the same diner down the road, sat in the same booth. This time, Caleb ordered for himself without hesitation. Eggs, toast, bacon. He didn't say much else. Neither of them did. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like both of them were thinking about things they weren't ready to say. The waitress brought the food, refilled the coffee, and moved on. The man waited until Caleb was halfway through his plate before speaking. "I saw the mark." Caleb's fork stopped midair. There was no confusion, no pretending he didn't know what the man meant. Slowly, he set the fork down and leaned back in the booth. "Where?" he asked. "Yesterday. In the motel. You didn't notice." Caleb didn't speak for a long moment. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the table. "You gonna tell me to get out?" he asked. "No." "Then why bring it up?" "Because I've seen that tattoo before," the man said. "My brother had it." Caleb looked up, surprised. "He got it when he was 17, the man continued. Tried to leave a few years later. Didn't get the chance." "What happened?" "He was shot. Not by strangers. By the same people he ran with. You don't leave that life easy." Caleb went quiet again. Then he exhaled, slow and sharp, like he'd been holding something in. "I didn't want it," he said. "Didn't ask for it. I was with the wrong people for too long. One night, someone said I needed to prove I was loyal. Next thing I knew, they were holding me down. And it was done." He rubbed his forearm, as if the ink still burned. "I stayed a while after that. Figured I didn't have a choice. Then something happened. Someone got hurt. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I left the next morning and didn't look back." He paused, then added, "But I still got the mark." The man nodded. "Yeah, I know how that feels." Caleb leaned forward, his voice lower now. "I don't want to go back. I'm not trying to find trouble. I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." The man didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just looked at the kid sitting across from him. The tired eyes, the hunched shoulders, the way he held everything so tightly. "You're not the first person to carry something you didn't ask for," the man said. "But you get to decide what you do with it." Caleb looked at him, unsure how to respond. "You don't have to tell me everything," the man said. "I'm not here to judge you. But I saw it, and I needed to know if you were still in it." "I'm not," Caleb said firmly. "Not anymore." The man nodded once. "All right." They finished their breakfast in silence. Not everything had been said, but enough had. And in that moment, the man knew Caleb wasn't just running. He was trying to start over. They got back on the road after breakfast. Neither of them said much. The conversation from the diner still hung in the air, not heavy, but present. It wasn't something you moved past in a few minutes. It stayed with you, settled in. Caleb leaned his head against the passenger window and watched the fields blur past. His arms were folded tight across his chest, his mouth set in a straight line. But he wasn't shutting down. He just looked like someone trying to hold himself together. The man kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. Every so often he glanced over to make sure Caleb was still with him. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. Sometimes it was hard to tell. After about 20 minutes, the man spoke. "Do they know you left?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He kept looking out the window, like he was trying to decide how much to say. Then he gave a slow nod. "Yeah, I think so." "Anyone come after you?" "I don't know, maybe. I didn't wait around to find out." The man nodded. He understood. He had seen this play out before. You don't just walk away from that kind of life and expect no one to notice. Even if you weren't important, someone always wanted to remind you what you owed. "You scared?" the man asked. Caleb didn't move. "Not really." The man raised an eyebrow, not to challenge him, just to see if the kid would explain. Caleb shifted in his seat. "I mean, yeah, but not like I was. When I left, I figured if they found me, they'd deal with me. But if I stayed, I'd end up doing something I couldn't come back from. That scared me more." The man kept his eyes forward. That's not nothing. Caleb didn't say anything. They drove in silence for a while after that. The road stretched on, empty except for the occasional truck passing in the opposite lane. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that made everything else look sharper, but neither of them seemed to notice. Eventually, the man took a right turn onto a smaller road. Caleb sat up straighter. Where are we going? Town called Brenton, not far. I know someone there. Who? The man paused. Friend of mine. Used to run a place for kids who were in rough spots. Still helps when he can. Caleb tensed. Like a shelter? Not really. More like a halfway spot. Somewhere to land. You don't have to stay. Just talk to him. Caleb turned back to the window. The man let the silence stretch. You're not the first kid he's helped, he said. Won't be the last. Caleb shook his head slowly. What if he says no? He won't. You sure? I'm sure. They passed a church, a small grocery store, and a row of houses with peeling paint and chain-link fences. It wasn't much, but it looked steady, lived in, real. The man turned into a gravel lot beside a brick building with a faded sign above the door. No bright colors, no slogans, just a name and a number. Simple. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. They sat there for a minute without speaking. You want me to go in with you? The man asked. Caleb looked at the building, then at his hands in his lap. No, I got it. You sure? Caleb nodded. The man reached into the center console and pulled out a piece of paper with a name and phone number written on it. He handed it over. If anything changes, or if you need to leave, call me. Caleb took it and folded it once, then slid it into his pocket. The man watched him open the truck door and step out. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked up to the building and pulled the door open. The man stayed in the truck and waited, watched through the windshield as Caleb stepped inside and disappeared from view. He didn't drive away right away. He just sat there, wondering what would happen next. Not for himself, for the boy who finally stopped running. Because what Caleb did next mattered, and the man knew the hardest part wasn't the leaving. It was choosing to stay. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Inside, the building was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel cold, just calm. The walls were lined with framed photos and a few hand-drawn posters. A couch sat against one wall. There were 2 chairs, a coffee table, and a front desk with a worn sign that simply said, "Ask for Will." Caleb stood there for a second, not sure where to go. He could feel the weight of the man's truck still outside, parked and waiting, just in case. He didn't look back. A woman stepped out from a hallway and offered a small smile. You looking for Will? He nodded. She pointed down the hall. Last door on the right. It's open. Caleb didn't speak. He just followed the direction, footsteps quiet against the old tile floor. The door was half open. A man sat behind a desk, reading glasses low on his nose, flipping through a file. He looked up as Caleb reached the doorway. You Caleb? Yeah. Will stood, extended a hand. I'm Will. Heard you might stop by. Caleb stepped in and shook his hand, unsure of what to say. Have a seat, Will said, motioning to a chair across from him. Caleb sat down, jacket still zipped, hands in his lap. Will didn't rush. He closed the file on his desk and leaned forward, elbows on the edge. I don't need your whole story, he said. Not unless you want to tell it. But I do need to ask if you're here because you're looking for something different, or if you're just passing through. Caleb hesitated. Then quietly, I don't want to go back. Will nodded once, slow and steady. That's a good place to start. Caleb looked up. You don't know where I came from. I've got a good guess, Will said. I've worked with enough kids who wore what you're wearing. Not the jacket, the weight, the quiet, the trying not to ask for anything. Caleb shifted in his chair. Will didn't press. He just kept his voice level, calm. You're not the first kid to walk in here with more behind him than ahead of him. But I'll tell you this. If you're willing to stay a little while, we'll figure something out. We don't have all the answers. But it's a roof, some meals, some time to breathe. Caleb glanced around the room. It wasn't anything special. The paint was chipped near the window. The desk had scratches in the wood. But something about it felt steady, like nothing in here was trying to impress him, just like the man who had brought him. Will leaned back in his chair. There's a group that meets on Thursdays, just some guys your age. They talk. Sometimes they don't. That's fine, too. Caleb nodded, more to himself than to Will. Can I think about it? You already are, Will said. You showed up. That counts. Caleb stood slowly. Can I just sit out there for a bit? Of course, Will said. Take your time. Caleb stepped out of the office and back into the front area. The woman at the desk gave him a quiet smile as he passed. He sat on the couch, leaned forward, and rested his elbows on his knees. He wasn't sure how long he sat there. 5 minutes. Maybe more. Outside, the truck was still there. He stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. The man was still behind the wheel, eyes steady, waiting. Caleb stepped out but didn't go to the truck. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. The man rolled down the window. You all right? Caleb nodded. Yeah. You staying? Caleb looked back at the building, then at the man who had stopped for him on the side of the road, sat across from him in diners and motels, and never once asked for anything in return. I think I should. The man didn't smile. He just nodded. All right. Caleb looked down. Thanks for everything. You don't owe me anything, the man said. Just take care of yourself. Caleb took a step back, then another. He raised a hand in a small wave, then turned and walked inside. This time, he didn't hesitate, and the man watched the door close behind him, knowing, finally, the boy had stopped running. He waited a few minutes after the door closed, long enough to be sure the boy wasn't coming back out. The man sat behind the wheel, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the front of the building. Nothing moved. No sudden footsteps. No one chasing after him to ask for more. Just stillness. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then he started the truck. The engine rumbled to life, steady and low. He didn't pull away right away. Just sat there, thinking. This wasn't how he expected the day to go. He'd figured he'd be home by now. Back to routine. Back to quiet. But the past 2 days had carved out a space he hadn't seen coming. The truth was, he could have kept driving the night he saw Caleb. Could have looked the other way like a lot of people would have. He didn't owe the kid anything. Didn't know him. But there was something in the way the boy looked, walking alone in the cold, that reminded him of something he hadn't thought about in years. Or maybe someone. His brother had been 16 when things started to go wrong. Smart, capable, but restless, and too proud to ask for help. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. He'd fallen in with people who promised loyalty and gave nothing but scars. The tattoo Caleb carried was the same one his brother had worn to the grave. He thought about that now. About how maybe stopping for Caleb wasn't just a good decision. Maybe it was something he'd needed to do. For someone who never got a second chance. He pulled out of the lot and turned onto the road, heading back toward the highway. For a while, the drive was quiet. The sun was higher now, casting light through the windshield and warming the cab of the truck. He rolled the window down just an inch to let in the fresh air. At the first gas station he saw, he pulled over and parked. Went inside, bought a coffee, and stood at the counter by the window. He looked out over the street. Nothing special. Just a few cars, a man walking a dog, 2 kids riding their bikes. But for the first time in a long time, he felt settled. When he got back to the truck, he pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. No messages, no missed calls, nothing that needed his attention. But he wasn't in a hurry. He thought about Caleb, about the way he stood outside the building, eyes steady, shoulders squared. It wasn't a big moment, but it mattered. The boy had made a choice, not because someone forced him to, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he wanted to. And that was something. It wasn't easy to turn your back on the life you knew, even if that life was hurting you. It was easier to keep walking, easier to believe there was no way out. But Caleb had stepped inside anyway, and that meant more than either of them had said out loud. The man reached into the glove box and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the one with Will's name and number. He added Caleb's name at the top and scribbled a short note under it. If he needs anything, call me. He didn't need to be involved in every part of the boy's story. That wasn't the point. But if Caleb ever needed someone again, he wanted Will to know he could call. He put the paper back in the glove box and sat for a moment, hands resting on his knees. The road stretched out in front of him, long and familiar. But something about it felt different now. Not heavier, not harder, just better. He finished his coffee, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The truck rolled down the highway, steady and quiet. The man didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need the noise. The hum of the engine and the open road were enough. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. It had been 3 days since he left Caleb at the building in Brenton. 3 days without a call, without a message, without an update. And that was all right. He wasn't expecting anything. He had done what he could, stopped when he didn't have to, listened when most wouldn't, left the door open, then stepped back. That mattered more than most people realized. He pulled into the same diner where it all began, the one off the highway with the chipped paint and the neon sign that buzzed when the wind picked up. He parked in the same spot, ordered the same coffee, and sat at the same booth. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. He looked out the window and watched the cars pass. He thought about the night he saw Caleb walking alone, the way the kid had kept his head down, the way he hadn't asked for help, but hadn't refused it either. Most people don't ask, not out loud. Sometimes they just hope someone notices. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small note Caleb had left in the motel, something the boy had slipped on the table while the man was in the shower. At the time, he hadn't said anything about it, just tucked it away. Now he read it again. Thanks for stopping. I didn't know people still did that. No signature, just that. He folded it carefully and slid it back into his pocket. People think changing someone's life takes some big moment, some speech, some dramatic rescue. But most of the time, it's smaller than that. A ride, a meal, a room with 2 beds and a door left open between them, listening without asking for anything back, and knowing when to say just enough, then step out of the way. Later that afternoon, as he filled up the truck at the gas station, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, just a text. Still here, still trying, just wanted you to know. He stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled, just a little, and replied with 2 words. Proud of you. He didn't expect another message. Didn't need one. He finished pumping gas, got back in the truck, and pulled onto the road. The wind pushed gently against the side of the vehicle, the sky stretched wide above him, and the miles ahead felt like something different now. They didn't feel endless. They felt open. And somewhere in a small town, a boy with a past marked into his skin had chosen to stay. Chosen to try. That mattered more than either of them had said. And the man knew. Sometimes, helping someone find their way isn't about changing their path. It's about walking with them for a little while, until they're ready to take the next step alone. He kept driving, not away from something, but forward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.